very quickly, I just wanted to put alongside that an event that happened back in 2021, April 2021, and that was that the BBC, of course, failed to report a huge protest up in London. I emailed Tim Davie to ask him why the BBC failed to report this protest when there were hundreds of thousands of people, all races, colours, ages, religions and backgrounds. What happened? Well, a huge silence. So we chased him up. Freeze these so you can see what we talked about, but I put a bit of meat behind my email back to him and prompted for that reply. Well, I did get a reply. But what did he say? Dear Brian, I am sorry, but I do receive hundreds of emails on numerous topics. As much as I'd like to, I simply cannot reply to them all. However, the team will always give you a response, which of course they didn't. So basically, the BBC solved the problem of crowds which are disagreeing with government policy and disagreeing, in this case, with matters to do with vaccine and public health by simply not reporting it. Alex, we'll come back to you because you've got some comments here from Holland.
Yes, people may recognise the young man shown on screen, a member of the Dutch Parliament for the most oppositional of opposition parties, the Forum for Democracy. He's called Gideon van Meijeren, Gideon in English pronunciation, and he is the man who famously held up the offending letter of acknowledgement and thanks, written rather effusively by the outgoing Prime Minister Mark Rutte to Klaus Schwab and the whole of the World Economic Forum, having asked first a question in the same Prime Minister's question session about, do you know much about the WEF and do you correspond with them? And Rutte said, no. And afterwards, he has a bit of a Teflon man reputation, does Rutte. He said, well, I can explain this away. I have a poor memory because I have so many of these things going on. But the letter, even if it was done by his officials, was boilerplate. Why is this in the news, or this man is newsworthy internationally now? Because this most tenacious of members of Parliament of the most tenacious party, I disagree with them on many points, but you have to give them their due in that regard, has now got a case hanging over his head. The Dutch public prosecutor, which has a strict state monopoly and, as in Scotland, can choose whether to drop a case or leave it hanging as a sword of Damocles to keep people in order. They've now said, a year after the complaint was made, that in a podcast of last year where Mr. van Meijeren said a very classic Anglo-Scottish American thing, actually, although it's very offensive to the Dutch ruling class, but a very standard thing for any Anglophone, which is that ultimately, if peaceful means don't get us very far with protesting, we have to use our weight of numbers to get the government out, which the Dutch have done enough times over the centuries, by the way. They've led Europe in it and the world. He's now being prosecuted for oprowing, which doesn't exactly tally, but you could call it incitement to violence. Rutte, in a coordinated show of outrage, said, imagine somebody wishing to upend our most precious thing we ever have, which, according to Rutte, is democracy. Very new understanding if you listen to the Dissident's Guide to the Constitution on our website, but suddenly that's the greatest good we have, apparently, not life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness or freedom of any kind. So van Meijeren had these charges against him announced by the public prosecutor just before Dutch Prime Minister's question time at 1:00 on a Tuesday, with all the cameras already lined up in Parliament for that. So he thinks it's extremely politically motivated, and I think you can't really fault him there. I don't have footage of it, but his party leader, Thierry Baudet, Baudet, quite well known abroad now, recently went to neighbouring Flanders in Belgium, where they speak Dutch, as they do here in the Netherlands, and addressed a conservative students' rally. And on the way in, he was repeatedly battered over the head quite severely. He got concussion with an umbrella by a man who then, he did get floored by the police, but by universal complaint by anyone who's watched the footage, they were very lackadaisical in arresting him at the scene. But the man shouts clearly and repeatedly in Ukrainian, no to Putinism, no to fascism. And after that, the Forum for Democracy has said that its 5 parliamentarians now need its members to fund bodyguards for it. But remember, this is the same country where we've had, 2 well-known assassinations in the early part of the century, one of a politician and one of a filmmaker. There's been a great to-do over Geert Wilders, another party leader, who's now going to have to be guarded for life, but he does get the protection as long as he's in Parliament. Baudet doesn't even get that, and we're just about to come to general elections again. So not looking good. What else has Rutte been up to on his way out? Well, as far away as the Chinese press, the South China Morning Post, it's been noted that he's doing the Dutch thing of dropping a heavy hint that goes clang, clang on the floor. I would be very interested in being Secretary General of NATO, he says. But the bit that interests the South China Morning Post is that he said, well, we try to make all our defense ministers and secretary generals women these days in Northern and Western Europe. That's how we show how progressive we are. But there you go. But he's putting it out. And Eva Vlaardingerbroek, well known to some viewers because of her British appearances on GB News, comes out with this, which I have to say, the sentiment behind it is broadly shared in the Netherlands, not just by the narrow supporters of the Forum for Democracy or the particularly severe opposition types. She says, Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte has announced he's available for the position of Secretary General at NATO. Mind you, this man who ruined our country in less than a decade. He sold our country out to the globalist agenda, flooded it with migrants, ruined our economy, and is the man behind the destruction of our farmers. And I would interpose, this is Alex speaking now, that the 2014 referendum on the EU association agreement between Ukraine and the EU, which was forced by Dutch law, requires that as well. Let's go back and read the rest. He goes on to say, now we know why he let the government fall some months ago, seemingly out of nowhere. And indeed, the government could have fallen in the coalition between the parties on any number of points, but no, it had to be that one. It was all intentional, says Eva Vlaardingerbroek, so that Rutte could secure himself a new job with his globalist friends. Now we know why he rushed the CETA treaty. We covered that at the time. Now we know why the Netherlands, under his rule, provided such an insane amount of financial support to Ukraine compared with other European countries. Now we know why he called the Ukraine-Russian war our war, and why he gave himself billions of our tax money to Ukraine and NATO. He was literally buying himself a new job. And according to the South China Morning Post, he might not even get it because they want a female candidate.
Okay, thank you, thank you, Alex. I'm smiling. It's just so obvious, this little circuit of friends and people moved around from one job to the other. We'll do some more tracking of him, hopefully. Debbie.